Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Find Me Project. My name is Mark DeLuca, and I am the founder and executive director here at Find Me. I want to start off by saying thank you and recognizing all of our audience and community members. We now have been able to grow Find Me to over 30,000 people, and that really helps drive our awareness and visibility to all of the missing person cases that we handle. Because we have so many new audience members joining us, we figured it'd be good to have an episode where we talk about what the Find Me Project is. And we also want to do a Q&A session with some of the most common questions that we receive. I want to start by talking about how many people are currently missing in the United States right now. And the first number, or the group of numbers, actually clearly identifies the challenge and issue that we have in the United States as it relates to missing persons. When you do a search for how many people are currently missing in the United States, what you'll find is a massive gap in the data, the numbers. And that's primarily because of what database or databases you're going to reference. That number can vary anywhere between 26,000 people to 87,000 missing people. Now, when our team was able to quantify and really take a deep dive and look at this, the total number that we were actually able to identify was 88,093 missing people currently in the United States right now. And understand that's only the reported and known missing people. One of the most common gaps that you'll find with missing person cases is that law enforcement agencies and other organizations just simply don't have the resources to navigate a missing person case. Now, I want to be clear, law enforcement agencies and other organizations do an incredible job, and we respect them with everything we have here at the Find Me Project. You have to understand that per day, your average mid-sized law enforcement agency will receive 15 new cases on top of the missing person case that they're working. Not only do they receive all these new cases, the actual physical resources, things like sonar and scuba diving capabilities, advanced drone systems that allow you to perform thermal imaging and LiDAR scanning, advanced technology that allows you to perform military-grade intelligence gathering. Most of those physical resources just don't exist with your average law enforcement organization. So, when you see families, friends, the communities where missing people are located get frustrated, they often feel that law enforcement agencies have forgotten their missing person. And I can't imagine how that feels. But it's a common trend that we see. And those are the biggest gaps that I think lead to what families and friends experience. Now, again, law enforcement agencies are doing everything that they possibly can to try and help find that missing person.
A mission with purpose to find the missing using the power of social networking and cutting-edge technology. We're military veterans, technologists, scuba divers, and relentless seekers. From deep forests to sunken vehicles, from silence to signal, every clue matters. If you've ever felt the call to stand for something greater, this is your moment. This is the Find Me Project.
Now, to anybody that's new here, our mission and purpose with the Find Me Project is to help find missing people by leveraging advanced technology, social networking, and the skill set of elite professionals. Our ethos is to serve as a beacon of light for those traversing their darkest hours. Now, I want to go ahead and answer one of the first questions that we had received as part of this. Where did the Find Me Project come from? Well, I'd have to actually go back about 6 or 7 years ago to where at the time I was working on a research project in the defense and safety sector. The project I was working on was basically to develop a system that could search and aggregate intelligence data at scale. At that time, we had a mother who had reached out to us where her daughter had been missing for roughly 4 years. She had gone missing from California and appeared to have vanished without a trace. As you can imagine, we did not hesitate to use our system to see if we could, gather any pieces of information to help find her daughter. Once we deployed the system, we were actually able to identify some data points that led us to Texas. Long story short here, she went from California. At the time, she was looking to reset her life. She had previous drug addiction challenges, and she found a job posting on a Backpage platform. So she went to Texas, and the group that she was going to be working for actually turned out to be involved with human and sex trafficking passively, though. They weren't extremely aggressive about it, which was lucky for her. This particular group over time was able to get her to start using drugs again. And their plan was going to be to get her so addicted to drugs to where she could no longer afford them. And this group would give her the drugs in exchange for basically her freedom. She was smart enough to recognize that this was happening and fled. She had no idea where she was going to go. She ended up hitchhiking and caught a ride in a semi-truck that actually took her up into the northeast area of Pennsylvania. So our system was actually able to identify some additional data and information that led us to Pennsylvania. We found out that once she arrived, she was homeless for a small period of time. She ended up meeting somebody where she became roommates with them. Over time, that living condition just didn't work out because of her ongoing drug dependency, and she went back to living on the streets. We were able to eventually track her down and reunite her with her family, right? So she was very, very close to getting sucked into the world of human and sex trafficking, but she was smart enough to recognize it, and our team, as well as many other people, were able to intervene. And my hope and my prayer is that she is still doing okay to this day. Now, once this happened, one of the things that I asked was, okay, we need to take a look at this. And I wanted to know how many people go missing each day. How many people are missing in the United States? And that goes back to that number of 88,093 active missing people in the United States today. When I heard that number, or whatever number it was at the time, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it, right? It just doesn't make sense. How can somebody vanish without a trace? So from that point forward, I decided to repurpose some of the software that I was building, which we renamed to Global Search, and the Find Me project was born. For many years, we operated in a siloed environment. But I'd say the biggest thing that we really looked to fill was a gap that existed at the time, and still very much does, outside of the Find Me project, where there was no single entity combining intelligence, technology, and operational search capabilities. So, the Find Me project existed, for the first several years. We operated kind of in the shadows. We worked with families, friends, the communities, law enforcement on a case referral basis, just a handful of cases, maybe a year. Throughout that time frame, we were successful in locating a few missing people or providing answers to families and law enforcement. So that's sort of the origin story. And, here in just, I'd say the past 2 years, we've decided to go a little bit more public to really drive awareness and, visibility. When you hear the words "Find Me," I think there's a very strong meaning behind them from not only an operational perspective, which is what I sort of just talked about, but also a humanly driven perspective. I can't imagine being a missing person, and every second of the day, you are praying that a hero You're praying that somebody is looking for you and that hero is going to come and save you. I think in terms of a basic example, but a very surreal example, where you have a person that's driving on a back road. They have an accident and they drive off down into a ravine and they're completely out of sight. Nobody saw them go into that ravine. How are they going to be found? What if nobody knew they were in this particular area? Maybe it's an area that they have never traveled to before, right? That's a humanly side of what we do and why I think it's so important.
A mission with purpose to find the missing using the power of social networking and cutting-edge technology. We're military veterans, technologists, scuba divers, and relentless seekers. From deep forests to sunken vehicles, from silence to signal, every clue matters. If you've ever felt the call to stand for something greater, this is your moment. This is the Find Me Project.
Okay, so question number 2 here. And again, I just want to say, we have this sheet printed out here. 100% transparency. We did not review any of these questions beforehand, right? We reached out to some of our community, asked for some questions, and we printed some of those out and have highlighted the ones that we think would be a good fit just before starting this. So the second one here is, what exactly does the Find Me Project do? Well, we sort of already just spoke about how we fill the gap between what law enforcement can do and what families actually need. It's very important to understand that the Find Me Project is, we don't conduct any type of investigations. We are a search intelligence organization. We gather open source intelligence and other intelligence techniques and opportunities. We also have the ability to offer resources that are not readily available. Those often include things like sonar and scuba diving capabilities, land-based search efforts, drone capabilities. One of the other things that I have really tried to show a lot of focus to is bringing in practitioners who have an elite skill set, where they have spent pretty much all of their life developing that skill set, and now being able to use some of that where they volunteer their time to help with these missing person cases. I'll give you a few examples. Forensic and behavioral profilers, intelligence professionals, targeters that come from an intelligence background, hackers, other cyber professionals, law enforcement officers, people who work in public relations or communications. All of that is absolutely important when you look at the best way to navigate a missing person case. Now, it is also important to understand that all of the services that we provide to families, friends, communities, law enforcement, we do so 100% for free. For the most part, the Find Me Project is self-funded by myself. I am in a rather fortunate and humbled position to be able to do that. As an engineer and leader in technology, I'm able to not only develop the systems and technologies that we rely on, but I'm also able to provide somewhat of a financial backbone to everything that we do. As you can imagine, that is by no means enough. Sometimes there are additional resources or areas that we would like to travel to help out, but we just don't have the financial capability at that particular time. So we do often refer and accept donations or funding from outside sources. That's something that we don't actively pursue, but we certainly welcome it, and it really does make a big difference when it comes to a missing person case. So if there's anybody that is listening and you are interested, you can go on to our website, which is thefindmeproject.com, and you can, find the different ways that you can help us by donating, whether that's financially or simply volunteering, right? Both are donating something, and it really does help. If you have any questions with that, feel free to go ahead and, reach out to us. All right, let's keep moving on here. What drives the people who do this work? Well, we are veteran run, right? I have a military background. I come from the United States Marine Corps. We have a lot of military veterans and active duty service members that do help us. And I think what you typically see with those members that make up our Guardian Angel Task Force is what we call it, is that they have an extreme devotion to being mission focused. They have no ego. They're very disciplined and they simply want to help. I think that's probably the biggest factor is that they simply want to help. No case is too old, too cold, or too complicated. So, every case that we receive, um, the amount of time that has lapsed since that person has gone missing really doesn't come into play. If we accept that case as part of the Find Me project, then we're going to work it no matter how long the person's been missing or the circumstances around their disappearance. All right, so when a case comes in, what actually happens? So let's talk about this here for a second. Let me get a sip of coffee. All right, so we receive missing person case referrals from anonymous sources. We receive them from families, friends, the community, sometimes even law enforcement. And once we receive those cases, typically right now our cadence or intake is a few missing person cases a month. Our team then begins to review each of those cases. And we're not necessarily picking and choosing, but we're looking at the cases where we believe that we can offer the most value with the resources that we have. It is important to understand that we do not take on malicious cases or cases where it's deemed that it's 100% known that some type of crime has happened, such as a homicide. There are caveats to that. And it's primarily when we may be working with law enforcement with some of the resources that we have, such as the sonar and scuba diving capability. If it's unknown or if there's any hesitation, again, we're going to offer the resources that we have, but we are not performing any type of intelligence. Once we do take on a case, our team of volunteers, which is known as our Guardian Angel Task Force, then begin to gather open source intelligence. They begin to look at things like NAMAS, the DOE network. We have certain team members that we typically always pull in, or we will look at our roster of Guardian Angel team members and determine which team members to reach out to and see if they can volunteer some of their time. Again, with many of our cases, we'd like to have forensic and behavioral profilers come in where, they spent their entire career doing that exact discipline. And when you actually see it deployed in a missing person case, it makes a world of a difference. Sometimes we even have other resources like geographic or forensic analysis completed where we're looking for any type of anomalies in the data. Now, once we conduct all of the preliminary onboarding, we take the initial information that we have and we enter it through our global search system. Essentially, what happens here is that our system will begin to search and aggregate data that exists out in the world of IoT or Internet of Things. Surface web, deep web, dark web. If it exists out there, our system will find it or has a very high probability of finding it. And that's really important because it allows us to develop a trail linking data together where every piece of data is basically a puzzle piece. And when you start to put each puzzle piece together, you start to see what that puzzle looks like or the big picture. So that takes place once we get to a point where we are able to pull in all of that data. We then visualize it through some of our software and technology. which I believe I'm going to talk about here in just a few minutes. Throughout that entire process, any information and data that we receive, we format it in a professional report, and we provide that to the respective law enforcement agency that's handling or investigating that missing person case. If we get to a point where we have actionable intelligence, where we're able to deploy any of our physical or operational resources, such as placing boots on the ground, water searches, drone deployment, that's typically our next step. We do our best, though, before we even get there to identify any type of, what we call an AZ or anomaly zone, where we have that actionable intelligence before we deploy any of our teams out into that area. We also have a fairly sophisticated process where, we also utilize PR, public relations, communications, where we're interfacing with different businesses in the area, local, national media outlets, and really trying to drive awareness and visibility to that particular case. I'll give you an example of a missing person case that we just recently worked, where not only through having a family member join us on the Find Me project and podcast and introducing the interview out to our network and our audience, but also interfacing with local, state, and national media outlets, we were able to actually increase visibility to over 100,000 people. And as part of that, we were able to receive some information in as it related to that particular case. So you can kind of see how everything comes together, all of the teams, all of the players, and it really does make a big difference. There are so many other factors that come into the missing person process. But I'm going to sort of keep it high level for now, because I'd probably be here talking for the next 2 hours as it relates to that. All right, next question. You mentioned proprietary technology in some of your past content. What are you actually running? That is a good question, and it's proprietary. I'm just kidding. So I've already spoke on global search. That is our primary, what I'm going to call parent system. Global search is used to aggregate and search for any data that exists out in the world of IoT. Also part of global search, we have a few different child applications that are currently active. And in the past several weeks, we've been working to develop some new software and applications as well. One of the ones that I've sort of showcased in the past is Nexus Investigative Intelligence. And this is basically a software that we developed that allows us to perform intelligence node registry. It maps relationships. It develops connections, and it allows us to visualize the data. This kind of goes back to developing those links through global search and how that feeds into Nexus. That's rather important because not only are we able to visualize everything at scale, but we can also ask our AI engine, the Nexus AI agent, to actually perform an analysis on all of that data. And the reason that becomes such an important factor is because when you look at the psychology and process and how a human brain works, or even a team of human brains, oftentimes with a missing person case, the amount of data and information that's generated is ginormous if the investigation is done right. A single human brain or a set of human brains simply cannot analyze and aggregate all of that data. It's just simply not possible. So that is where Nexus is able to utilize artificial intelligence and computer learning to actually search through that, aggregate it, find patterns and things that a human or a set of humans simply cannot do. It's also important, from the visualization to be able to look at the data and actually see what the connections are, see what data points actually have more connections than others. It's just really good, to help us out. We also have Overwatch, which is used for geographic anomaly detection. It basically ingests case data and surfaces patterns that may have been missed throughout the investigation. We also have, some of the other software and applications that we use are, mapping capabilities. Right now, we're showing a lot of attention to being able to leverage um, Overwatch and global search to perform that search and aggregation, but then use everything that's been gathered and identified to autonomously using agentic AI capabilities, identify AZs or anomaly zones. So these could be cities, towns, locations where there's some type of anomaly that's taken place, or the data for that missing person case has pinpointed an area of interest that we need to focus in on. Sometimes, we can even get as granular as identifying HAZs, which are hydro anomaly zones, bodies of water that we need to search. And, we're able to place that pin on a map, and then, that will help with our um, search process as we deploy resources. We have lots of other new software and technology that is going to be coming available. I'm not going to talk about it right now. Um, but I think it is important, right? I have no idea what's going on with, if and how we're going to make some of this available. If you are a law enforcement agency, if you're a search and rescue agency, fire department, or you're an organization that does help search for missing people, and you think any of this software and technology could be valuable for you guys, reach out to us, right? Go to our website, thefindmeproject.com, use the contact process, or send us an email, and I'd be glad to strike up a conversation with you. All right, so let's talk about what's coming next for the Find Me project. And this is really where I want to introduce Operation Riptide, which is going to be our underwater search tour that will primarily take place in North Carolina and the surrounding region. What we're going to be doing is taking our sonar and scuba diving raft out to certain cities and locations that have been identified by that process that I just spoke to you about. We're going to have AZs or anomaly zones identified. And then within those AZs, we want to pay special attention to land-based search areas, as well as HAZs or hydro anomaly zones. We may identify, or our system may identify, these locations by active missing person cases in that particular area. Sometimes we may have not only a person missing, but also a vehicle missing for a substantial period of time. And that drastically increases the probability that that person may be submerged underwater, and that's why they are still missing to this day. So those are some of the areas that we're going to want to pay special attention to. We're also, let's see what else I want to talk about this. It's also, we may identify these different anomaly zones through our automated process where there's some type of anomaly taking place in the data. And that anomaly could go back to missing persons, homicides that have been solved, looking at that ratio, any other type of gateway or dependent crime. It could be location specific, such as the terrain or just individual values related to that location. Many, many different intelligence factors and values have been weighted in as it relates to the algorithm that runs all of this and helps us identify these locations. You're likely going to see me share some of the UI or user interfaces for these systems that we have developed in the very near future. So it is rather exciting. And our hope, again, is to help find missing people or bring answers through Operation Riptide. So if you are a family member, a friend, a community member, and you know somebody that is missing, and in particular, they're missing along with a vehicle, feel free to reach out to us, especially if you are in the North Carolina or surrounding area, and we will look at scheduling that into our tour that we have coming up here very soon. All right. We're going to hopefully get ready to close this out. I don't want this to be too long. I don't want to just be rambling. But I do hope everybody is finding this valuable. I'm going to take this final question here. How bad is the missing persons problem in this country, really? So, when we look at the current active missing person cases in Namas, the number is 26,554. Those are just the cases where law enforcement agencies or other like organizations have reported that to Namas. Remember, if I go back to the beginning, we had a total count of missing people in the United States right now at 88,093. So you can see how there is a big gap in between those two numbers. When we look at the cases that go unresolved year over year, typically what you will find is out of the total number of missing persons per year, 1 to 2% of those cases actually remain unsolved. They remain active. And when you take the totality of all the missing person cases and you quantify down to 1 to 2%, that equates to about anywhere between 5 to 10,000 new unresolved cases year after year. One of the factors that people often talk about is the disparity between resources when it comes to high profile and low profile cases. You often will see a number of high profile missing person cases pop up on the news and in social media every year. What you'll find is those cases do naturally get additional resources. And when you look at the low profile missing person cases, they certainly get almost no attention, or they don't have a lot of resources deployed to them. So it's important that we continue to drive the idea that no matter the missing person case, we are deploying the same amount of resources and we're giving the same amount of attention, regardless if it's a high profile and low profile case. Now, another factor that we have to look at is the total number of unidentified remains that are reported in Namas per year. And right now, that's 15,496 total unidentified remain cases or records that exist in that platform. That number is likely far higher, but again, I'm only referencing the data that's available in Namas. Unidentified remains is something that is likely directly correlated to many of these missing person cases. And we're seeing phenomenal work and enhancement in areas such as genealogy investigations and tracing, as well as other factors where we see enhancements with DNA analysis and other solutions become available. This is something that we always factor in when we take on missing person cases. As a matter of fact, some of our systems are actually able to do age progression, where we're able to take a missing person and age them to current time, and then utilize facial recognition to go out and search the world of IoT, both physical photos and videos, to see if we can identify any match. There have been some cases that we have worked behind the scenes. They have not been made available public as of yet, where we have come very close in identifying a positive match for some of those. So, that's an area that has to show, we need more attention there. And it's something that we're also going to show, lots more attention to as well. So this is a big problem, right? When we see the number gap, where there's a lot of confusion between the total number of missing people in the United States per year, and then when you look at the number of people that go missing per day, it's not right? There's the process, the system, it's broken. We have to fix it, right? The people that are missing deserve better, and our hope is that we can continue to spotlight this and provide answers to those families. So that's going to get us to a point where I want to go ahead and close this out. We are going to be sitting down with a few families here within the next week to 2 weeks. We are going to showcase or spotlight their missing person case. And we want to get that out to all of our audience and community members, as well as everybody else through relationships with news agencies. We will be starting Operation Rising Tide here very soon. So I'll have some more with that. I know as I speak, we are getting the sonar raft, some of the final things that we need to get set up there completed. So maybe we'll post a couple videos here or there with that as well. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who has tuned in to today's episode. We're going to have lots more content coming your way. Again, if you know of a missing person and you feel like the Find Me Project can help, contact us. Thank you.